case of Shannon Starbucks. Shannon Starbucks, a 42-year-old woman, was born on April 19, 1969, in Anderson, Indiana, as the youngest of 3 children, with 2 older brothers. After her parents divorced and formed new families, Shannon gained additional siblings. On December 3, 2011, Shannon was found lying on the floor of her bedroom, positioned in a sexually suggestive way. An erotic massager had been placed on her abdomen, suggesting a deliberate effort to degrade her after death. Police quickly suspected foul play because her body showed multiple bruises and abrasions. A medical examiner later determined that some of the marks were consistent with stun gun injuries, and findings indicated her body had been repositioned. Her official cause of death was ruled as strangulation. The detectives working the case faced a challenging task. They had to piece together the last hours of Shannon's life and determine who was responsible. Shannon, a mother of 5, had been reported missing by her ex-husband, Clay Starbucks, a day prior to the discovery of her body. Clay, 47, informed authorities that he had been unable to reach Shannon since around 3 p.m. on December 1st. Shannon sent a text to her daughter, explaining that she couldn't pick up the kids from school because she wasn't feeling well. She told them to wait for their father, saying she had already informed him of the change in plans. However, his phone was turned off, so he was unaware of the situation. The younger siblings, Marshall and Serena, were tired and hungry, prompting 15-year-old Logan to call their older brother, Austin, for help. She asked him to drive them to their father's house, just a few blocks away. When they arrived, Austin mentioned that he hadn't been able to reach their mother either, assuming she might have turned off her phone to rest. He then put the kids in the car and drove them to their father's house. Clay was surprised to see the children but was pleased to spend time with them. Since the older kids had been living with him after the divorce while the younger ones stayed with their mother, Clay chose to enjoy the unexpected visit and did not attempt to contact Shannon. This was not the first time a situation like this had occurred with her. He had expected Shannon to attend the school basketball game that evening, but she never arrived. On December 2nd, Clay took the kids to school and then went to Shannon's house. The front door was locked and the blinds were drawn. Without a spare key, he was unable to enter. Clay sent a message stating that if Shannon didn't show up by 7 p.m., he would contact the police. After waiting until the designated time, he went to the police station to report Shannon Starbucks missing. 2 sheriff's deputies visited her home but found nothing unusual, so they returned to the station. The officer advised Clay to wait 1 more day, and if he still hadn't heard from Shannon, he should return to the station. A quick note before we continue. As you know, on Uncover Eyes, we release new videos every other day. Many of you have reached out expressing a desire for daily content, so we've launched a new channel, also focused on real-life crime stories, called Secret Crime Mysteries. On the days we don't post videos on Uncover Eyes, we'll be uploading them on Secret Crime Mysteries. This means if you're looking for daily doses of astonishing real-life crime cases, don't hesitate to subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into today's case. The next day, Clay returned to the police station, and it was then that he discovered he wasn't the only one looking for Shannon. A friend and her mother had also reported being unable to contact her, which was unusual for Shannon. This new information prompted the police to take the case more seriously. It had been 48 hours since Shannon's disappearance, and several people were worried about her. The police visited Shannon's home again. Upon entering the residence, they found no signs of forced entry or robbery. Initially, everything appeared to be in order. However, when they entered Shannon's bedroom, they discovered the disturbing truth. Shannon Starbucks' disappearance was a result of a brutal murder. In her room, investigators found an unmade bed with a blanket nearby, but the sheet was missing and the mattress cover had red stains. Her cell phone and diary were on the dresser. Forensic experts examined the room for fingerprints, finding 12 latent prints on the massager box and bathroom mirror, while some surfaces had been wiped clean. DNA analysis was conducted on traces found in common areas, and specialists took scrapings from under Shannon's nails, face, and neck. Detectives believed the murder occurred after Shannon got out of the shower, and her body was moved to the bed and then the floor. The missing sheet was found in a washing machine, suggesting the perpetrator tried to eliminate evidence. Clay arrived at Shannon's house by noon to find out what had happened to his ex-wife. However, the scene at her yard was ominous, with yellow tape cordoning off the area, an ambulance, and several police cars parked near the lawn. Clay was the first to be informed of the tragic event. To gather more information about Shannon and her lifestyle, the detectives questioned Clay after he had calmed down. He explained that he and his ex-wife had a morning routine where he would take the younger kids to school and she would pick them up afterwards. However, on December 1st, his car broke down a few blocks from home, disrupting their routine. Clay had texted Shannon to ask her to take the kids to school. It was supposed to warm up around 11 a.m., but when he tried to start the car again, it still wouldn't start. He gave up and went back inside to take a nap. Clay slept for several hours without being disturbed, during which time his cell phone ran out of battery. To support his story, he showed the police his correspondence with his ex-wife, Shannon. Initially, everything seemed to add up. Clay was cooperative, providing his cell phone, DNA, and fingerprints. He also expressed concern for Shannon, explaining that their divorce had made her more vulnerable. When asked for more information, he revealed that Shannon had joined a dating site after becoming single. As an attractive woman, she had many admirers. According to Clay, she might have been seeing multiple people at the same time, and one of them might have been responsible for her death. Unfortunately, he didn't have any specific names to share. During the conversation, Clay became emotional and cried, struggling to accept Shannon's death. After recording his statement, the police sent him home. He had to break the news of their mother's death to their children. At the start of the investigation, the case surrounding Shannon Starbucks' demise was gathering momentum. Investigators questioned the Shannon family's neighbors, focusing on every detail, especially reports of unfamiliar people and vehicles in recent weeks. An autopsy revealed severe injuries, including chest trauma consistent with the use of a stun gun, 10 broken ribs, and head and body injuries likely caused by a blunt object. The severity of the injuries made it difficult to determine the exact time of death, but the expert estimated that Shannon's life ended between December 1st and 2nd. Scratches on her body suggested that she had been moved, and her broken neck bones supported this theory. The medical examiner found evidence of strangulation using a soft object, possibly a hand, towel, or sheet. A breakthrough in the case came from the analysis of body samples, which revealed male DNA. This suggested that the suspect might be one of Shannon's close male acquaintances, including her ex-husband or secret admirers. Clay Starbuck, her ex-husband, had cooperated fully with the investigation, including undergoing a medical examination to check for any injuries or harm. Detectives suspected that the perpetrator might have been injured during the struggle, but Clay showed no signs of injury on his hands. The investigators then examined their sons, 21-year-old Austin and 18-year-old Blake. The only issue that arose was the presence of old cuts on the older son's hands, but these were explained by his job at a window manufacturing plant. During conversations with the sons, some facts were established that would later become clearer. The children knew that after the divorce, their mother had been dating and they disapproved of it. They had seen explicit photos on their mother's laptop, leading them to wonder if she might have been targeted by an online predator. It was clear that the sons loved their mother and were deeply shaken by her death. However, they had disagreed with the changes she had been making in her life. In a subsequent interview, Clay expressed himself more clearly. He blamed Shannon's behavior for his family's problems while he was away on business, especially her frequent encounters with other men. Clay even suspected that Marshall might not be his biological son, but he loved him regardless. Clay believed that after their relationship ended, Shannon started to indulge excessively and not appropriately for her age. He disapproved of her dropping off the kids at his place when she went on dates. By this point, investigators had not only spoken to Clay and the children but also interviewed Shannon's relatives and friends. The detectives developed a more comprehensive understanding of the deceased and her family. Shannon had always dreamed of having a big, loving family. Growing up, she was a kind and modest person who loved to draw and was very good at it, winning many awards. At 20, she met 25-year-old Clay Starbuck in Florida, where she had moved with her family when she was young. Clay was on vacation from Alaska. They were introduced by friends at a party and hit it off right away. That night, Shannon learned a lot about Clay. He had gone to school in Colorado to learn about diesel mechanics and later worked on the Trans-Alaskan Pipeline, which paid well. However, he was already married with 2 kids. Despite his complicated past, Shannon wasn't discouraged. She actually saw it as a plus, thinking it gave him valuable experience for their future together. Shannon and Clay got married soon after meeting. As Clay's new wife, she moved in with her husband. At first, she struggled to adjust to her new surroundings and the weather, but she quickly settled in. Shannon's married life wasn't as perfect as she had envisioned. Her husband Clay was often away, leaving her to manage the household by herself. However, her love for him gave her the strength to carry on, knowing that his work shifts would eventually end and he would return to her. In the meantime, she took on the role of mother to his children from his previous marriage and soon gave birth to their own son, Austin, followed by another son, Blake, 3 years later. In 1996, they welcomed a daughter, Logan, who was later diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. Shannon accepted her daughter's diagnosis with love and care, becoming her closest companion. The family was later completed with the arrival of another daughter, Serena. Shannon devoted herself to her children's well-being, education, and spiritual growth. She was also known for her cooking, crafts, and other hobbies within their community. However, she was so focused on being a caring mother and a loving wife that she didn't realize her husband was having an affair at work. When she discovered his affair, she felt deeply betrayed and shocked. This led her to file for divorce in 2000, marking the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She still had feelings for her ex-husband, so she moved to Arizona to start fresh and ease the pain of their separation. There, she attempted to start a new relationship, but it didn't work out because she realized she still loved her ex, Clay. Clay was also reaching out to her and asking her to come back, claiming he had changed. Believing him, she gave him another chance. In 2001, they had a son named Marshall, their 5th child. However, instead of strengthening their relationship, Marshall's birth created new tensions. Even when they formally remarried in 2006, their relationship remained strained. 6 months later, the family moved to Deer Park, Washington. Clay's work kept him away, leaving Shannon to care for the children and manage the household. She kept her family entertained by organizing outings and parties at home. However, the frequent time spent apart put a strain on her marriage, creating doubts and mistrust that eventually led to a permanent separation in 2010. Crossing into her 40s, Shannon started to rebuild her life with the hope of finding love again. She was determined not to give up or make the same mistakes as before. Even when her ex-husband Clay suffered a serious injury, Shannon chose not to go back to him. However, she still provided him with support and help. In February 2011, Clay quit his job and moved to Deer Park to be closer to his children and Shannon. Although he hoped Shannon would take him back, she didn't feel the same way. She had finally found freedom and was enjoying it. After Clay's surgery, Austin and Blake moved in with him, enjoying more independence from their mother. Shannon started a new chapter, finding a part-time job and enrolling in a dental assistant course to support her family since Clay stopped paying child support due to illness. The children stayed with Clay on Wednesdays and every other weekend. By summer's end, Shannon completed her certification and was ready for her next goal. Shannon Starbucks had been seeking a fresh start, creating a dating profile in hopes of meeting someone special and leaving her past heartache behind. She regretted spending her best years with a man who didn't appreciate her and was capable of deceit. Tragically, her dreams were cut short one December morning when she became the victim of a heinous crime. Her funeral, held on December 10, 2011, was attended by a large number of people, a testament to her bright and sincere personality. She was laid to rest at a cemetery in Orlando. The investigation into her death was swift, thanks to public attention. Detectives focused on her ex-husband Clay, verifying his alibi for December 1st. His fingerprints didn't match those at the crime scene, so they checked his story against databases and examined Shannon's phone, laptop, and diary for other potential suspects. Detectives thoroughly examined Shannon's mobile phone, leading them to add several individuals to the list of suspects. These men had been in contact with her through a dating site, raising suspicions about their potential involvement. One suspect, Tom Walker, had arranged a date with Shannon for December 5th, just hours before her death. Their conversations had been candid, and they had exchanged photos. However, when Tom Walker requested that Shannon take a photo using an adult toy, she declined. Notably, her body was later discovered in the exact pose that Tom Walker had mentioned. Within an hour, detectives located Tom Walker, who was shocked not only by the news of Shannon's death, but also by being considered a suspect. He promptly provided an explanation for his activities on the day of her death, which was corroborated by his colleagues and surveillance footage. The next individual on the list was John Wilson, who had scheduled a meeting with Shannon on December 1st. An examination of their correspondence revealed that the suitor, whose real name was John Kinlawn, had no intention of a serious relationship with Shannon and had used a fake identity. He was married and worked in a different field than he claimed, which explained his secretive behavior. When questioned, Kinlawn had an alibi for the time of the crime, which was corroborated, and he was released after providing a DNA sample. The investigation was back to square one, but a breakthrough came when detectives examined Shannon's mobile phone. They discovered that a 911 call had been made from the phone on the morning of December 1st, but it had been deleted from the call log. After retrieving the call, they found it contained only the sounds of sobbing and rustling before abruptly ending. Shannon's phone records revealed a failed call and 11 messages sent after her death. GPS data confirmed her phone was at home, where she was killed after dropping her kids at school. The suspect tried to mislead the investigation and was found to be close to the Shannon family, even using a nickname for the youngest son. After uncovering this information, Clay's statements were examined more closely. He had a clear motive for killing his ex-wife, as divorce can be difficult for some partners to accept. Additionally, he had the perfect opportunity, knowing her daily routine. As a result, authorities decided to track the suspect's car route again, this time using footage from street surveillance cameras. This is when the officers' suspicions became clearer. It turned out that Clay's car had not broken down. At the same time, results from another analysis arrived, showing that DNA material collected from Shannon's body matched the suspect's samples exactly. When Shannon returned home, a heated argument broke out, which ultimately led to her death. The unusual position of her body was a deliberate act of vengeance by Clay, who was enraged by her newfound freedom. After the murder, Clay stayed in the house and impersonated Shannon in text messages. It became clear that his intentions to harm her may have been long-standing. A friend's conversation with detectives took on new significance, revealing that Clay and Shannon's relationship was troubled. Shannon had confided in friends that she was tired of Clay's controlling behavior and criticism and had feared he might harm her if she ever left him. In fact, Shannon had contacted the police multiple times between June and November 2011, reporting that Clay was stalking her and making her feel unsafe in her own home. She had become so fearful that she refused to give anyone a spare key to her house. Ultimately, Shannon secured a restraining order against Clay, limiting their communication to text messages. A thorough examination of her diary revealed that she not only feared her former lover, but also believed he was manipulating their children against her. Clay had been spreading vicious rumors and portraying her as promiscuous. As a result, when he was arrested on February 6, 2012, the children refused to believe he was involved. The discovery of a tracking program on Shannon's laptop, a hard drive labeled Shannon's desktop computer in Clay's house, and printed correspondences did not seem to disturb them. The older children questioned the authenticity of the DNA analysis, thinking the accusations against their father were unbelievable and the case was fabricated. However, law enforcement and other relatives had a different perspective. At the trial, the prosecution presented a substantial amount of physical evidence and testimonies, confidently demonstrating Clay's guilt. In June 2013, justice was served when Clay Starbuck was found guilty of first-degree deprivation of life under aggravating circumstances and disrespect to human remains. He was sentenced to life without parole. His 2015 appeal was denied. He's serving time in Spokane County. Shannon's family grieves her loss, but the children siding with their father hurts more. His obsession led to revenge, leaving the children without a mother or father. Michael Wayne Jones was born on May 1, 1981, in the small town of Brattleboro, situated in Vermont, USA. While the identities of his parents remain unknown, it is evident that his family life was fraught with complexity and difficulty. From a tender age, Michael witnessed the repeated physical and mental abuse between his parents, and he too was a victim of this mistreatment. These issues seem to be a tragic and enduring legacy affecting both sides of his family. During Michael's early years, his father was incarcerated for reasons that are still unclear. This event deeply affected Michael, creating a profound sense of emptiness in his life. Seeking a fresh start, his mother remarried and had another son named Dana. Michael found some joy in having a sibling, but their home life remained far from ideal. His stepfather's inability to maintain steady employment placed the entire financial burden on his mother, who was forced to take on 2 jobs. Compounding their difficulties, Michael's stepfather exhibited aggressive behavior toward both him and Dana. The use of violent disciplinary methods created an environment of fear and oppression. If Michael arrived late to school or made a mistake, he was harshly punished, often locked in a shed and subjected to sexual abuse. Despite the harshness of his life, Michael showed a generous and protective nature. In such dire circumstances, he often took on the role of protecting Dana, sometimes enduring punishments meant for his brother to spare him the pain. This courageous and loving behavior forged a strong bond between the brothers, with Michael becoming a figure of admiration for Dana. The stepfather's control was so stringent that Michael was rarely allowed to interact with other children from school or the neighborhood. His mother, living in fear of her husband, was unable to confront or oppose him. This created an atmosphere of isolation, secrecy, and oppression within the household. Without any external support, Michael and Dana had to endure the ongoing abuse. The bleak atmosphere of their home did not go unnoticed by the neighbors, who began to suspect the presence of abuse. On one occasion, driven by desperation, Michael ran away from home. But Michael had no clear destination, so he was eventually found by the authorities. When questioned about his reasons for leaving, he shared the difficult story of his family life. However, he received no assistance regarding his situation. Despite his efforts to appear fine to those around him, Michael's true feelings were hidden beneath the surface. As he entered adolescence, his low self-esteem significantly affected him, leading to a depression that required medical treatment. The only respite from his pain was his high school. There, despite his introversion and loneliness, Michael felt somewhat at ease as responsibilities helped him forget his oppressive home life. He was fortunate to meet Dorothy, who owned a nearby business. She introduced him to her daughter, whose name remains unknown. Michael formed a friendship with the girl, which eventually turned into an on-and-off relationship. This special connection allowed Michael to reveal a kind, affectionate, and protective side of himself. Dorothy was delighted by this new facet of Michael, but was also concerned. He always seemed on edge when it was time to go home. Although Dorothy's daughter often visited him, Michael did everything he could to keep her away from his house. With so many signs, Dorothy finally decided to delve deeper into her conversations with Michael. He then confided in her about his constant worry for his mother and brother's well-being. This allowed her to glimpse the emotional burden and anguish he carried. Their friendship provided Michael with a temporary respite from his difficulties, a space where he could express his feelings. After high school, Michael made a life-changing decision by joining the United States Navy. This marked the beginning of a new chapter, providing him with a clear purpose within a highly structured environment. As he developed a deep love and attachment for the Navy, Michael realized how right his choice had been. This sense of well-being was largely due to the new friendships he formed with his fellow servicemen. Despite occasionally drinking, he always showed up for work and proved to be a calm and relaxed individual. At the time, Michael was dating a fellow service member whose name has been kept confidential. However, it became clear that the relationship was imbalanced as she was physically abusive. This revived old shadows of his family environment. When his relapse into depression became evident, he decided to leave her. He then focused on excelling in his career, which included undergoing additional training to provide medical care in combat situations. This earned him an assignment with the Marines in a medical role. During this period, Michael met a young woman named Sarah. They fell in love and eventually got married. Following their marriage, Michael left the Marines to focus on his new role as a husband. Sarah played a crucial role in Michael's life, helping to keep him on the right path. Together, they welcomed 3 children, and Michael dedicated himself to being a good father, always striving to provide them with the best upbringing possible. Although Sarah took the lead in many decisions, Michael consistently supported her choices. Around 2011, Sarah found a job in Central Florida, specifically in Orange County, and the family relocated there. She worked at Mount Dora Animal Hospital, managed by Bo Delaporte. As weeks went by and Michael struggled to find a job, Sarah persuaded Bo to hire him, recognizing his work experience. Michael quickly adapted to his new responsibilities and demonstrated remarkable dedication. He always exuded joy, and it was evident to everyone that he loved his work, caring for animals and attending to their owners. His positive attitude made him highly sought after, with pet owners preferring his services. His employers grew very fond of him, especially Bo, who, beyond their professional relationship, extended his friendship and trust to Michael. Bo even began to delegate some management responsibilities of the animal hospital to him. Everything was going smoothly, and in 2014, Bo hired a new veterinary technician, Casey. Born on December 23, 1986, in the city of Ocean, Indiana, Casey was the second daughter of Nickley and David. Her siblings were Sarah and Brandy. From a young age, Casey was undoubtedly the heart of her home, her overflowing energy lifting everyone's spirits, even beyond her family. As she grew, Casey showed great love for others, driven by a special connection to her spirituality. No matter the challenges, her strength lay in her faith and personal values. During her time at high school, Casey met Richard. Initially, their attraction was mutual. However, after dating for a few weeks, Richard began to notice certain behaviors in her. Despite her kind side, Casey also exhibited jealousy and possessiveness. Her insecurity led to an abusive side, expressed through words and actions. Nonetheless, Richard persisted, and with patience and calm, they married after completing their studies. Over time, Casey's mother decided to move to Florida, and shortly after, Sarah and Brandy followed her. Given Casey's close relationship with her family, she and Richard also relocated to the same state in 2009. As they settled in, Casey found occasional jobs as a transporter and sometimes worked as a dog groomer while learning the trade of a veterinary technician. During this period, the couple welcomed their first child, Cameron, and their happiness was evident. Casey showed immense maternal devotion, making Cameron's well-being her top priority. A few years later, their joy grew even more with the birth of their second child, Preston. The children thrived in an ideal environment, filled with laughter and the loving care of their parents. As Casey advanced in her veterinary technician career, she found a job at an animal clinic where she met Michael, who had become Bo's right-hand man. From the beginning, Michael and Casey got along exceptionally well, but Bo and his wife sensed that their apparent friendship hinted at something more. This attraction, despite being inappropriate given the circumstances, was undeniable for Michael, even at the risk of being discovered by Sarah. The inappropriate attraction affected Michael's focus at work, leading to a decline in his performance, although he was always eager to meet Casey's needs and requests. She reciprocated his attention, and it wasn't long before they embarked on an affair. Eventually, both decided to divorce their respective spouses. Sarah gained custody of their 3 children and moved to Jacksonville. While Casey and Richard agreed on shared custody with fixed schedules that Casey strictly adhered to, she took responsibility for transporting Cameron and Preston, diligently fulfilling her parental duties. Meanwhile, Bo grew increasingly frustrated with Michael's declining performance. Additionally, Michael made inappropriate advances toward other clinic employees. When Michael requested leave to travel to his hometown, claiming his mother's death, Bo later discovered it was a ruse for a beach vacation. This betrayal led Bo to terminate Michael's employment. In retaliation, Michael broke into the clinic, stealing money, computer equipment, and even a weapon. Bo identified Michael as the culprit and reported him to the police. With Casey's help, Michael fled to New Mexico but was eventually captured and brought to justice. However, after a brief stint in prison, he was released. Despite everything, Casey's trust in Michael remained unshaken. They soon moved in together, and Michael took on the role of stepfather to Cameron and Preston. By 2017, around Halloween, Michael and Casey finally tied the knot and moved into a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom trailer. Despite the limited space, the modest rent made them feel fortunate to have each other. That same year, they welcomed their first daughter, Mercalli, followed by Ayana the next year. While Michael worked as a construction laborer to support their 4 children, Casey took pride in her role as a homemaker. She cherished every stage of her children's growth and sought ways to preserve those unique moments. This led her to create a YouTube channel to share special milestones of their family. On the surface, their life seemed idyllic, with Michael exuding calmness and Casey's laughter often heard in the background of their videos. However, behind closed doors, the couple frequently clashed and their arguments had become a constant issue. Distrustful of Michael, Casey made a habit of checking his phone. She also grew suspicious whenever he worked long hours. On the night of July 10, 2019, while the children slept, a heated argument erupted between them. The trigger was Casey's discovery of a supposed infidelity on Michael's phone. The confrontation quickly escalated from verbal to physical. In a fit of rage, Casey grabbed a baseball bat and shoved Michael with it. Overcome with anger, Michael managed to wrest the bat from her and in a blind fury struck her repeatedly, ultimately killing her. Michael then placed Casey's body in a plastic bag and stored it in a closet. He attempted to clean up the scene as best as he could. The next morning, he decided to take further steps to avoid the children discovering what had happened. He loaded her remains into his car. In the following days, to avoid suspicion, Michael continued to share content on Casey's social media accounts. On July 26th, pretending to be Casey, he texted Richard asking him to take care of Preston and Cameron. He did the same with Casey's mother, instructing her to look after Mercalli and Ayana. When Richard came to pick up Cameron and Preston, he found Casey's absence strange and voiced his concerns to Michael, who brushed it off, saying she had left town for a few days. Casey's mother had a similar reaction when she came for Mercalli and Ayana. That same day, Michael called Sarah, telling her that he was separating from Casey and needed to see his children while she worked. Later, he picked them up and took them to his residence. During the drive, the children noticed a foul odor in the car, similar to rotting meat. For 2 weeks, Michael continued to drive between his home and Sarah's residence to visit his children, all while Casey's lifeless body remained in the car. As days passed without any word from her daughter, Casey's mother began to sense that something was wrong. On August 10th, Richard returned Cameron and Preston to Michael, and this time, Casey's absence caused him much greater concern. During their brief conversation, Michael apologized for being the cause of their divorce and acknowledged the challenges Richard had faced during his time with Casey. As the new school year approached, Michael realized that the absence of the children and Casey would raise questions from the elementary school staff. One night on an unspecified date, he dragged Cameron out of bed and suffocated him, then placed his body in a suitcase. The next morning, he did the same with Preston, this time putting the body in a garbage bag. A few days later, the trailer park owner served Michael an eviction notice, giving him a maximum of 2 weeks to leave. Amid this grim situation, Michael went to pick up Mercalli and Ayana. When Casey's mother saw him again, still without Casey, she had a nervous breakdown. Her mind was fixated on one question: where was her daughter? As Michael drove with the girls, he was suddenly overwhelmed with guilt. He felt he had no choice but to turn himself in at a police station. However, after lingering at the entrance for a while, he changed his mind and drove back home. Once there, He filled the bathtub with water and drowned Mercalli and Ayanna. After they stopped breathing, he placed their bodies in a plastic container. By early September, the approach of Hurricane Orion led to a state of emergency being declared in Florida. Many sought refuge in public shelters to protect themselves from the impending disaster. This situation provided Michael an opportunity to flee with the 5 bodies. He loaded them into his truck and drove north, planning to stay with Sarah and his children. Despite the ongoing emergency in Florida, Sarah never saw Michael call his wife or inquire about the children. This made her uneasy, but aware of the marital issues, she chose not to ask questions. After the hurricane passed, Michael's neighbors reported a foul smell coming from the trailer to the property owner. Assuming the Jones family had already left, the owner first peeked through the windows and then entered the trailer. Aside from the furniture and personal belongings, nothing seemed amiss, but the stench was unbearable. By this time, Casey's mother, desperate to find an explanation for her daughter's absence, speculated that Michael might be in trouble with the law again and was hiding. She concluded that her daughter might be in hiding for safety reasons, but instead of staying idle, she contacted the sheriff's office to request a welfare check on Casey. When the officers conducted the welfare check, they found the house empty and seemingly recently cleaned. However, the presence of cleaning supplies near the door contrasted with the persistent smell of decomposition. Despite this, the property owner arrived and asked the officers to leave. Meanwhile, with the bodies still in his vehicle, Michael left Sarah's house and drove across the state border into Georgia. There, near a wooded area, he disposed of Cameron, Preston, Mercalli, and Ayanna. While driving on the highway and checking his GPS, Michael lost control of his vehicle and crashed. Surprisingly, he emerged unscathed, but the vehicle was completely wrecked. Police officers quickly arrived at the scene and immediately noticed the terrible odor coming from the truck. When they opened the suitcase, they were met with a horrifying sight: Casey's remains. There, on the roadside and under the shocked gaze of the authorities, Michael confessed in detail to his gruesome actions, including the location of the children. Consequently, he was taken into custody. Upon hearing the news, Casey's family felt as though their world had collapsed. In a state of shock, they could not stop asking themselves how a human being could inflict so much harm on others, especially on babies. For the first time in her life, Sarah experienced hatred towards someone, as she later stated. However, the thought that Casey might have witnessed her children's deaths caused her the most pain. Based on the findings and armed with a search warrant, the agents returned to Casey's residence. Upon entering, besides the smell, they noticed a reddish stain on the carpet. They prepared to collect evidence at the scene. Meanwhile, the autopsies were being performed. According to the forensic report, Cameron had a fractured jaw but no other visible signs of trauma. However, a towel was found in his mouth. Preston had a noose around his neck. Mercalli and Ayanna were found together in a small plastic bag containing a baby bottle labeled Ayanna and a pair of pink sandals. Both had died by drowning. As for Casey, there was crushing on the front of her skull and face, indicating a blow with a blunt object, but no other traumas were found on her body. Michael agreed to be interviewed by the officers. During the process, he remained calm and precise in his responses, making no attempt to deceive the agents. On the contrary, Michael thanked the officers for capturing him, stating that there was nothing more he could do given the circumstances. Calmly, he then recounted the events chronologically, from the night of the fight with Casey to his subsequent arrest. When asked about the motive behind his actions, Michael responded that everything had accumulated in his life to the point where it seemed like the best and only way out. Beyond the logical impact of such a tragedy on everyone involved, it was particularly hard and cruel for Sarah to accept that her own children had been exposed to and lived with a man like Michael. Understandably, after learning the facts, Sarah suffered from mental health issues. Michael was charged with second-degree murder for Casey's death and 4 additional counts of first-degree premeditated murder for the deaths of the children. He pleaded guilty. This plea avoided a trial, moving the case directly to the sentencing phase. In this phase, a jury of 12 people had to decide between life imprisonment or the death penalty. As part of their strategy, the defense focused on Michael's difficult childhood and his mental health issues, presenting various psychological disorders as mitigating factors. However, the state prosecutors argued that the undeniable brutality of the case warranted the death penalty. In January 2023, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty in accordance with state law. During a brief 9-minute hearing, the judge sentenced Michael for his crimes. Additionally, he was given life without parole for Casey's murder. Michael's lawyer immediately filed the necessary paperwork to appeal the sentence. Despite this last effort, on Friday, April 28, 2023, the judge upheld the previous sentence. Prosecutors expressed their satisfaction with the justice served for the victims' families. As he awaits execution, Michael remains behind bars. The case of Susan Wright. Susan Lucille Wright was born on April 24, 1976, in Houston, Texas, to parents Velma Sue and Jimmy Lawrence Wright. She was the eldest of 2 children and had a biological sister named Cindy. As a child, Susan was active, sociable, and creatively talented. During her school years, she developed a passion for dancing and aspired to become a choreographer. With her bright and attractive appearance, as well as her slender figure, she drew many admirers and being the center of attention. After completing high school, Susan tried but was unsuccessful in getting into college. To raise funds for her future education, she decided to take some time off. During this period, she found work as a dancer at a well-known nightclub, performing partially nude on stage. She decided to leave her job and use her savings to enroll in evening courses at a nursing school. To support herself and maintain her independence, Susan took a job as a waitress at a restaurant while pursuing her studies. However, she soon discovered that medicine was not her real passion and had trouble paying for her studies. Consequently, she stopped attending her classes to concentrate on her job. In the summer of 1997, 21-year-old Susan met her future husband, Jeffrey Andrew Wright, at the Galveston restaurant where she worked. He was immediately drawn to her beauty and radiant smile, becoming a regular customer and leaving generous tips. After some time, Jeffrey mustered the courage to ask Susan for her phone number. He would call her daily, sometimes multiple times a day, to arrange romantic dates and surprise her with small gestures, such as sending flowers with heartfelt notes to her workplace. In the evenings, he would meet her and walk her home. The man was 8 years older than Susan, but she didn't consider this a significant issue. He was charming, attentive, and caring, which quickly won her over. However, it soon became apparent that Jeffrey struggled with alcohol and substance abuse. He claimed to have overcome his addiction to drugs and promised to quit drinking entirely. Susan, being young and in love for the first time, believed him. She thought that their love could conquer any obstacle. Shortly after, Susan discovered she was pregnant and excitedly shared the news with Jeffrey. Although he seemed pleased about becoming a father, he didn't take any decisive action, such as proposing or suggesting they move in together. Confused by Jeffrey's behavior, Susan took matters into her own hands. She insisted that their child should be born within a married family, and Jeffrey agreed to her terms. By the time they officially got married, Susan was already 8 months pregnant. They chose to have a quiet, intimate wedding without guests or celebrations, rather than a grand ceremony. Around this time, they purchased a home in a quiet area of Harris County, Texas, and moved in a couple of weeks before the birth of their child. In December 1998, they welcomed their first child, a son named Bradley, and appeared to be the perfect family. In 2001, Susan became pregnant again, and in the spring of 2002, she gave birth to a daughter named Kay. The family had a small dog named Buck, a comfortable family car. Jeffrey worked at a local construction company, and after the children were born, Susan became a stay-at-home mom by mutual agreement. She took care of the kids and created a cozy home environment. The neighbors said that Mrs. Susan was a kind person, friendly, sociable, a caring mother, and a loving wife. However, it was later revealed that the reality of their family life was far from perfect. Her husband was extremely demanding in every aspect of their lives. Susan's days were filled with cleaning, doing laundry, and cooking. Jeffrey demanded freshly cooked meals every day, prohibiting her from preparing meals in advance or reheating leftovers. Maintaining a perfect and clean home was a challenging task, especially with two small children. Additionally, Jeffrey required his clothes to be washed almost daily, as he refused to wear the same item twice. If Susan failed to meet these expectations, she faced insults, humiliation, and even physical abuse. Moreover, Jeffrey was extremely frugal, providing Susan with a meager weekly allowance of $100 to cover all household expenses, including cooking, childcare, and maintenance. Susan had to keep track of every expense, giving receipts to her husband Jeffrey. However, Jeffrey's behavior was a bigger issue. Despite promising to quit drinking, he continued and started using drugs, downplaying it as light doping for work stress. The substances made him aggressive, causing him to harm Susan and their son. Jeffrey denied his behavior was a problem, claiming Susan knew about his substance use before marriage. His parents sympathized with Susan, but felt powerless to intervene. After moving in together, Jeffrey's behavior became increasingly aggressive, leading to physical, emotional, and intimate abuse. He initially apologized, but the violence became regular. Jeffrey would often go to the gym 3 times a week to practice boxing as a stress relief measure. He looked forward to sharing this activity with his son when the boy was older. On January 13, 2003, Jeffrey returned home from the gym agitated and on edge. As Susan prepared dinner, he attempted to teach their 5-year-old son some boxing moves, but lost control and struck the child, causing the boy to burst into tears. Susan pretended not to notice the incident, but it was the last straw for her. Following dinner, she put the kids to bed. Meanwhile, Jeffrey stayed in the bedroom where he continued to take drugs. There are different accounts of what happened next. According to Susan, when she went into the room, Jeffrey assaulted her, attempted to rape her, and tried to stab her with a knife. She claimed she fought back in self-defense after managing to take the knife from him. The events that followed are unclear, with different accounts of what happened. According to Susan, when she entered the bedroom, Jeffrey tried to attack her, sexually assault her, and kill her with a knife. However, she claimed she managed to grab the knife and defended herself, leading to a fight. Her story changed multiple times, but the version told in court, based on the investigation, was considered more believable. Susan decided to use her dance skills to distract her husband and lower his guard. Wearing a short silk robe over her bare body, she put on a seductive show for Jeffrey. She then suggested a role-playing game that involved tying him up, which he agreed to. Using 3 of Jeffrey's neckties, she bound his hands and one leg to the bed. She used the silk belt from her robe to secure his other leg. With Jeffrey immobilized, Susan created a makeshift gag using her underwear, pretending it was part of the intimate game. To set the mood, she lit candles and turned off the lights. Jeffrey was tied to the bed with a gag in his mouth, unable to move or speak. The room was dimly lit. Jeffrey poured hot wax from a candle onto Jeffrey's chest, which was painful but initially seemed like part of a game they were playing. However, when she poured wax onto his genital area, the pain became unbearable. Jeffrey tried to free himself and scream, but he couldn't. His wife, Susan, took a small sharp knife from the kitchen and began stabbing him repeatedly, starting at his groin and moving up his body, slashing his genitals, legs, abdomen, chest, arms, neck, and face. She began slowly, expressing her grievances with each stab, recounting the insults, humiliations, and abuse she had suffered. As she continued, Susan began to cry and stab faster. Experts later counted 193 shallow knife wounds on Jeffrey's body. Most of these wounds were not fatal, and Jeffrey was conscious for most of the ordeal. Susan's actions suggested she was in a state of extreme emotional distress. Her lawyers argued that she was in a state of affect, unable to stop even when Jeffrey showed no signs of life. She had not considered what she would do next or how she would handle the body. Shallow grave in the backyard. She sat next to her husband's body on the floor for hours. Eventually, she looked around the blood-covered bedroom and knew she had to act before dawn. She carefully checked outside through the window, ensuring the coast was clear. Her gaze landed on a shallow pit in the backyard that Jeffrey had dug for a fountain over the weekend. A plan formed instantly. This pit would become her despised husband's grave. To move the body, Susan used a garden wheelbarrow. This raised questions for investigators, as a petite woman was able to single-handedly lift and transport a man twice her weight out of the house. Suspicions of an accomplice arose, but were never confirmed. Under the cover of darkness, Susan discreetly relocated the body to the pit and covered it with a thin layer of soil. She then cleaned up, removing the blood-stained curtains and bed linens, placing them in trash bags and dispersing them in different bins. The blood-soaked mattress was flipped over as Susan was unsure how to properly clean it. She spent the remaining time until dawn scrubbing blood from the floor, walls, and carpet. Scrubbing the carpet is a big deal with a large stain that couldn't be removed. In an attempt to eliminate any evidence of the violent confrontation, Susan applied bleach to the affected area, hoping the chemicals would destroy any remaining traces. Susan made a distressing call to her husband's parents in Austin, Texas. She was emotional as she recounted the events. Her husband, under the influence, had physically assaulted her and their son, spilled bleach on the carpet, and then ended their relationship before leaving. Jeffrey's parents were shocked and concerned by the news. Although they were aware that their son had his flaws, they felt genuine sympathy for their daughter-in-law. However, when they learned that he had hit their grandchild, they immediately offered for Susan and the children to come and stay with them. Despite their willingness to help, the young mother declined their offer. She added that she planned to file a police report and reveal all the incidents that had occurred at their residence. 2 days later, Susan visited the police station as her husband's sudden disappearance raised increasing concerns and action was necessary. Susan reported that she and her children had been victims of domestic violence perpetrated by her husband and required protection. She successfully obtained a restraining order against her husband, preventing him from approaching her and the children, although she was already aware that he would never be able to come near them again. As evidence, Susan presented bruises and cuts on her arms, which she alleged were inflicted by her husband using keys when she attempted to defend herself. Additionally, Susan had a small bruise on his face and corroborated that his father had struck him. At first, the tearful woman's story seemed believable and logical. She claimed her husband, under the influence of alcohol and substances, had attacked her and their young son. Then, realizing what he had done, he became scared and fled. However, over time, suspicions grew because Jeffrey had not contacted anyone. He appeared to have run away without his belongings, documents, or mobile phone. He didn't show up for work or visit his parents, and none of his friends or neighbors had seen him. It was as if he had vanished. Susan found it unbearable to stay in the house where she confronted her husband. She couldn't shake the feeling he was still alive and would rise for revenge. She was losing her grip on reality. Even their dog, Buck, sensed it, constantly barking and trying to dig up the yard where Jeffrey was buried. On January 17th, Susan went to her mother's house with her children. When her mother saw her daughter in person, she fully realized the severity of the situation, even though she had already been aware of it. Velma directly asked if she had killed her husband, and her daughter broke down in tears, nodding in admission. The daughter then confessed to the crime, revealing the location of her husband's body, and repeatedly expressed uncertainty about what to do next. Following her mother's advice, Susan reached out to lawyer Neil Davis the next day and confessed to killing her husband and attempting to cover up the crime. After gathering all the details, the experienced defense attorney considered possible scenarios and contacted the Harris County District Attorney's Office on January 19th. Davis reported Susan's confession, including the burial of her husband's body in their backyard, and stated that she was willing to provide a full statement at the police station. On January 24, 2003, Susan voluntarily went to the police station intent on making a full confession. However, her account was disjointed with confusing details and occasional contradictions. She sometimes referred to her late husband as if he were still alive, expressed fear of him, and requested protection. Consequently, Susan underwent a psychiatric evaluation. The results revealed she had suffered a nervous breakdown and was experiencing depression. Despite this, the evaluation found that Susan was still capable of understanding the actions she had taken. When investigators uncovered the remains of Jeffrey from the makeshift grave in the backyard, they were shocked by the brutality of the scene, having never encountered. Experts counted a total of 193 knife wounds on the victim's body distributed across various areas, including the groin, legs, shoulders, arms, abdominal area, chest, neck, and face. The majority of these wounds were superficial, meaning they were not life-threatening on their own. However, one head wound was severe enough to have caused death. The large number of superficial wounds suggests that the victim endured a prolonged and agonizing death, likely while still conscious, as his wife repeatedly stabbed him with a small knife. The victim's wrists and ankles showed deep marks from the ties and belt used to bind him. These injuries indicated that the victim had attempted to free himself but was unsuccessful. The ties and belt were still on the body when it was found. Additionally, there were traces of candle wax on the victim's chest and groin area. Susan claimed that the candle wax was an accident, resulting from her husband knocking over a lit candle. However, the prosecution argued that the hot wax was more likely used as a form of torture to inflict suffering on the bound victim. Furthermore, the victim's mouth contained his wife's underwear, which acted as a gag to prevent him from screaming or calling for help. Toxicological tests showed the deceased had alcohol and several controlled substances in his system, which could have led to aggressive and irrational behavior. Initially, the bedroom where the confrontation occurred seemed normal, except for a large bleach stain on the carpet. However, upon closer inspection using special chemical agents and equipment, it became clear that Susan had spent considerable time cleaning up the scene. Once wiped away blood traces were revealed, the true extent of the violence became apparent. Blood was found throughout the room, including on the ceiling, and the mattress was saturated with it. The trial began in late February 2004, with Susan having already spent a year in custody. Her children were being cared for by her parents and sister Cindy. Her lawyer was well prepared, having worked extensively with Susan to build her case. During the trial, Susan frequently broke down in tears as she recounted the events of that horrific night and the abuse she suffered leading up to it. She claimed to have endured years of cruelty and violence at the hands of her husband. The defendant, Susan, claimed that on the evening of the incident, her husband returned home from training in an agitated state. He began demonstrating boxing techniques to their 5-year-old son, Bradley, and said the boy would also take up boxing. When Bradley refused, his father hit him in the face. Susan put the children to bed and then tried to have a serious talk with her husband, urging him to seek help at a clinic. However, he became angry, grabbed his keys, and tried to leave. Susan attempted to stop him, which led to a struggle that caused injuries to her palms and wrists. According to Susan, her husband then struck her, causing her to fall and momentarily lose her bearings. After regaining composure, Susan saw her husband Jeffrey holding a knife, but her testimony became inconsistent. Her lawyer argued she was in a state of affect, leading her to seize the knife and strike Jeffrey. Susan claimed she secured him to a cart with ties and a belt after the confrontation, and candle wax accidentally landed on his body. However, the defendant had no explanation for why her underwear was found in the victim's mouth. In contrast, the prosecution presented a more convincing and logical case. Expert testimony revealed that the victim's wrist and ankle wounds were inflicted before death, likely as part of a ruse to restrain the victim. This also provided a plausible explanation for the gag in the victim's mouth. Additionally, the angle of the injury suggested that the perpetrator was positioned on top of the victim rather than struggling with him, which would have resulted in different injury patterns. All the cuts on the victim were inflicted from the front, indicating that the attack occurred while he was lying on his back, unable to move. It was unclear whether Susan had planned her husband's murder in advance and intentionally used the pit he dug for a fountain as a makeshift grave. Prosecutors, however, suspected that she had carefully orchestrated the crime, motivated by the potential insurance payout. The case drew widespread media attention, with Susan being labeled the blue-eyed butcher or blonde meat grinder by the press. Jeffrey's family demanded the harshest possible sentence. While many of their neighbors felt sorry for Susan, recalling instances where she had bruises that she attributed to her own clumsiness, but which may have been signs of physical abuse. Prosecutors initially sought a life sentence for Susan, but later reduced their request to 45 years in prison. In March 2004, she was found guilty and sentenced to 25 years. She showed no emotion when the judge delivered the verdict, appearing detached from the proceedings. A year later, her lawyer's attempt to appeal the decision was rejected. In 2008, Susan and her defense team filed another appeal, which was influenced by new testimony from a previously unknown witness. Misty McHale, wife of former NFL champion Steve McHale, was a key witness. She had a lengthy relationship with Jeffrey Wright in the mid-1990s and was briefly engaged to him. However, she suffered physical abuse, humiliation, and cruel treatment from Jeffrey, leading her to end the engagement and cut ties. Following this new information in Jeffrey's testimony, Susan's prison sentence was reduced to 20 years. She became eligible for parole in 2014 at age 38 but was denied. A second denial followed in July 2017. After 16 years in prison, Susan Wright was released in the winter of 2020 at age 44. She was met by reporters and photographers, causing her to break down in tears and ask to be left alone. Her trial received extensive media coverage, including a broadcast on court TV. Richard Beasley was born on June 15, 1959, in Washington, D.C., United States. His mother, Carol, whose maiden name remains unknown, became pregnant at a young age. Although she later married Richard's biological father, their relationship was short-lived. Soon after, Carol met Jim Beasley. At the time, Carol worked as a secretary at a high school, while Jim was a truck driver. After a brief courtship, Jim and Carol married and later had 2 daughters. However, Jim was far from the ideal husband or father figure. He struggled with alcohol addiction, enjoyed gambling, was jealous and frequently abusive, creating a fearful atmosphere at home. Despite the hostile environment, Carol tried to instill faith in the value of charity in her children to give them hope. By his teenage years, Richard had developed a knack for smooth communication and persuasion. After graduating from high school in 1976, he spent some time in the Navy before attending trade school, where he learned machining skills. This trade allowed him to earn a living. Richard was also a motorcycle enthusiast, a passion that connected him with a girl named Tina Kern, who shared his love for the speed and culture of motorcycles. During this period, Richard began engaging in criminal activities. In 1985, after stealing a motorcycle in Texas, he was imprisoned, which temporarily ended his romance with Tina. However, after serving only 4 years, he was granted parole in 1989. At 30 years old, Richard returned to Acre and reconnected with Tina. They married, moved in together, and in 1993, they welcomed their first and only daughter, Tanya Beasley. During Tanya's early years, Richard appeared to be a hardworking man and a loving father. Tanya enjoyed outings with her father to the mall, park, or zoo, and painting together was another activity she cherished. Tina, having become a caring woman and devoted mother, longed to leave behind their past, including the motorcycle lifestyle and its associated culture. Richard did not share this desire, but kept it to himself. Despite repeatedly assuring his wife that he now led a more upright and responsible life, the truth was different. Richard soon returned to a life of crime involving drug trafficking, home invasions, and selling firearms to criminals, all while keeping his activities hidden from Tina. In the mid-90s, Richard Beasley was apprehended by agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. He was sentenced by an Ohio judge to 7 years in federal prison on charges of robbery and illegal arms trafficking. Due to an administrative error, Richard avoided extradition to Texas, where he was still on parole. As a result, Tina divorced him, and their daughter Tanya remained in her mother's custody. During his imprisonment, Richard found solace in his faith, claiming that God had always been the one constant in his life. Upon his release in 2003, he returned to Akron with a new sense of purpose. Determined to turn over a new leaf, He soon secured a job as a garbage truck driver. Additionally, he became a volunteer chaplain at a local church, dedicating himself to spreading the divine word and aiding the homeless. He particularly empathized with those who had made mistakes or were suffering from substance abuse. Richard became a frequent volunteer at a soup kitchen, where he formed a close bond with a boy named Brogan Rafferty. Born on December 24, 1994, Brogan was the eldest son of Yvette and Michael Rafferty, who had started their relationship at a young age. The family, later completed with the arrival of a daughter, lived in a modest home in Akron suburbs, marked by a certain dysfunctionality. Yvette's long-standing substance abuse issues worsened over time. While Michael did his best to support the family with his early morning machinist job, the situation was challenging as Yvette gradually neglected her responsibilities, leaving Brogan largely to fend for himself. Brogan also couldn't rely on his father, as Michael often resorted to physical punishment when Brogan got into trouble or displeased him. Unsurprisingly, by the age of 8, Brogan sought refuge in Richard's presence. Once, when Yvette disappeared due to her substance abuse, Brogan, feeling helpless, turned to Richard for support. From that moment, Richard took on a protective and mentoring role for the boy. Initially, Tanya felt jealous of their bond, but she eventually understood that Brogan needed a positive figure in his life. In 2005, Richard was involved in a car accident while working, resulting in significant fractures as well as head, neck, and spinal injuries. To manage his pain, he was prescribed painkillers, to which he eventually became addicted, though he kept this a secret. This addiction drastically changed Richard, making him prone to outbursts of anger over trivial matters. Despite this, his reputation as a community pillar remained intact. In 2009, using a financial settlement from his accident, Richard opened a halfway house for parolees and sex workers. Judges, lawyers, and even prosecutors believed he was genuinely committed to being a reformed man. Richard was known for his advocacy, not only for the accused and addicts, but also for his ability to persuade judges to grant their release, after which they would come under his supervision at the halfway house. There was undeniably something likable about Richard, and he possessed a remarkable talent for convincing others. During her first year of high school, Tanya wanted to follow in her father's footsteps and got involved in his charitable organization, a decision that Richard wholeheartedly supported. Together, they managed to raise significant funds for their cause. Around this time, Tanya had her first boyfriend, a boy with a troubled past who remained anonymous. He claimed to have changed, and when Richard asked Tanya if her boyfriend would be willing to work at the halfway house, she thought it could be a positive influence. However, Richard actually intended to have him sell drugs in the neighborhood. While helping Richard clean out his voicemail, Tanya stumbled upon a message from her boyfriend, revealing their secret activities. Feeling devastated and betrayed, Tanya found even the simple act of walking through the school halls and talking to friends challenging. She grew distrustful and doubted everyone's true intentions. Her relationship with Richard suffered a severe blow, and it was painful for her to distance herself from the father she once adored. Richard then grew closer to Brogan, who would do anything for him. Brogan viewed Richard as the only person who had been there for him during his troubled childhood. The kind and gentle boy Brogan once was had transformed into a dominant and assertive young man. Meanwhile, the halfway house had clearly become a front for illegal activities. Richard exploited the women he housed, keeping them in a cycle of drug addiction and forcing them into prostitution, all under constant threats. Eventually, the women had enough and reported him to the authorities. In December 2010, after a police raid on the house, they found chemicals used to manufacture drugs, prescription medications, and other substances. Richard was arrested and charged with drug trafficking and inducing prostitution. Additionally, he had violated his parole again and faced the possibility of decades in prison. In July 2011, Richard managed to post bail. With his trial scheduled for September, he was supposed to return to court in August. Desperate to avoid more prison time, he concocted a plan with Brogan to assume another person's identity, which required killing someone. They scoured the streets of Akron and eventually encountered Ralph Geiger, a disheveled 59-year-old man who was unemployed and living in a shelter trying desperately to get back on his feet. Ralph Geiger's situation was particularly tough, as he had seen better days and always adhered to the rules. After graduating from high school in the 1970s, he moved to California and worked in an antique store with his father. When he returned to Ohio in the late 1990s, he started his own remodeling and handyman business, found considerable success even employing others. However, by the early 2000s, the economic recession and housing market collapse left him homeless. Though Ralph had no wife or children, he did have a genuine friendship with Summer Raleigh, a 26-year-old woman who saw him as a father figure. Determined to improve his circumstances, Ralph frequently used the public library's computer to search for jobs. This was where Richard approached him with an enticing job offer, taking care of a cattle ranch and handling general maintenance. The job came with a 2-bedroom mobile home, rent-free, and a salary. Seeing this as an incredible opportunity, Ralph immediately accepted. He shared the good news with Summer, but curiously did not provide details about how he found this dream job. On August 8, 2011, Ralph called Summer to tell her he was on his way to his new job. She wished him luck and asked him to stay in touch. That same day, he got into Richard's car with Brogan driving. About 90 minutes later, they stopped in a forest. Richard invited Ralph for a walk, and with Brogan by his side, he coldly murdered Ralph. They then took his documents. Brogan was tasked with the gruesome job of digging a grave to dispose of the body. On the way back, Richard threatened Brogan with a knife, warning him that if he spoke, his mother and sister would be in danger. The following week, Richard assumed Ralph's identity to secure housing and a job. When he missed his court date in August, a warrant for his arrest was issued. Richard, needing to go into hiding again, moved to another room in mid-October, this time with a man named Joe. He asked Joe to share his internet service. Richard did not completely abandon his previous hideout, thinking it would be useful to have 2 different places to take refuge. Recognizing the potential of the internet, but aware of his limitations, he turned to Tanya for help. Under a fabricated story, Richard asked his daughter Tanya to create an account on a classifieds website, and she agreed. Richard then posted the same job offer that had lured Ralph, using the pseudonym Jack. The ad sought a specific profile, a single older man, someone who might be down on his luck. In a declining economy with high unemployment rates, the responses came quickly. In mid-October, Richard responded to David Pauley, one of the applicants. David, around 50 years old and from Norfolk, Virginia, was unemployed and had divorced in 2009. He had a son, and these circumstances had left him a sad man. He spent hours aimlessly browsing the internet with little hope. His family details are sparse, but it's known he had a twin sister named Deborah. When David saw the ad, he thought it was too good to be true, but felt tempted nonetheless. Richard, while providing details about the job, also mentioned his role as a preacher. When David shared that he had many possessions to sell, Richard saw an even greater opportunity. They arranged to meet on October 23, 2011, in Marietta, Ohio. David excitedly shared the news with Deborah, feeling triumphant about securing what he considered a great job offer. He even remarked to his sister that it seemed like a divine blessing. On October 22, 2011, David prepared for his departure, calling Deborah and promising to stay in touch as much as possible given the rural setting. Meanwhile, Richard and Brogan drove to the forest where Ralph was buried, and Brogan dug a new grave. The next day, David met Richard and Brogan at a restaurant for breakfast. Afterward, they headed to the remote area where Richard claimed his property was located. Upon arriving at the site, Brogan excused himself to go to the bathroom, leaving Richard alone with David. Seizing a moment when David was distracted, Richard drew a gun and shot him. David fell to the ground, lifeless. Hearing the gunshots, Brogan ran back and found Richard rifling through David's pockets. Following Richard's orders, Brogan disposed of the body in the freshly dug grave. Acting as if nothing had happened, they returned to the restaurant in Marietta and took David's car, along with his belongings. These included tools and even Christmas decorations. They sold everything, making around $1,000. However, Richard's addiction was costly, and the money quickly vanished within just 15 days. Desperate, Richard sought a new victim from the applicants responding to his job ad. The next respondent was Scott Davis, a 49-year-old man from South Carolina. Scott was single and, despite having gardening skills, couldn't find a job. The job offer seemed attractive to him, as it would also allow him to visit his mother in Ohio. During their conversation, Richard learned that Scott owned a Harley-Davidson motorcycle and had various work tools. They arranged to meet on Sunday, November 6, 2011. On the appointed day, Richard and Brogan waited at a restaurant where security cameras captured their presence. Once Scott arrived, he had breakfast with them, and they followed their usual pattern. As they approached the remote wooded area, Richard repeated his usual story, saying they needed to stop to pick up some equipment to repair the road leading to the farm. Deep in the woods, Richard told Scott they were lost and it was time to turn back. Sensing something was off, Scott turned to look around and immediately felt uneasy. Just as he finished turning, he saw Richard pointing a gun at him. Overwhelmed with fear, Scott instinctively started running. Knowing he had to escape at all costs, he sprinted away without looking back. Richard fired, hitting Scott in the elbow. Scott fell to the ground, but before Richard could aim again, Scott got up and, with blood gushing from his injured arm, continued to run. Seeking refuge, he stumbled down a slippery slope. As he got back on his feet, another shot rang out, grazing his head, a chilling reminder of how close the danger was. Another bullet whizzed past him, dangerously close. Scott's heart raced faster than he had ever experienced before, but he ran with no trace of doubt in his body. Emerging from the dense foliage, he stopped, disoriented, but aware that danger was nearly inevitable. Meanwhile, Richard returned to the road, got into the car with Brogan, and they began searching for him. Richard even instructed the young boy to run over Scott if they spotted him on the road. Scott, however, had other plans. He decided to hide in a creek, thinking it was safer than seeking help immediately. He stayed there for 7 hours, constantly alert to any strange sounds. After that, he continued his escape until he found a house and knocked on the door. The residents were initially skeptical of Scott's story, but his bloody and desperate state convinced them to call emergency services. The response team was sent right away. When they heard Scott's story, they too were suspicious, initially thinking it might be a drug deal gone wrong. Moreover, there was no farm matching the description Scott had given. Fortunately, Scott could prove his story with the classified ad he had responded to and described his attackers. He said the older man, about 51 or 52 years old, had dark hair with some gray and went by the name Jack. The younger one, around 17 years old, and was very tall. The police shared this information with the media, hoping someone might provide a lead. Within hours, Scott's story caught the attention of local news outlets. During the investigation, the police received an unexpected call from Deborah. She recognized the similarities between Scott's ordeal and what her brother David had told her before he left. Not hearing from him, something very unusual gave her the feeling that her brother might be a victim. Focusing their search on the wooded area where Scott had hidden, authorities found a trail of blood and followed it to the attack site. There, they discovered a freshly dug empty grave, concluding it was meant for Scott and suspecting it wasn't the only one. The police withdrew to get tracking dogs, and upon returning, they combed the area and found a second grave. Inside, they found David's lifeless body. Days later, during another search of the area for clues leading to the pair of criminals described by Scott, authorities discovered a third grave containing Ralph's remains. At that time, the man's identity was unknown. Lacking the necessary resources to continue the investigation, the local police contacted the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI. The FBI took the first steps by analyzing the classified ad and identifying two key points: the victim's profiles and the ad's writing style. They also began tracking the advertiser's IP address. Despite the widespread attention and warnings about the fake ads, Richard still needed money and continued searching for new victims. Astonishingly, despite the widespread warnings about the fraudulent ads, Timothy Kern fell into the trap. Timothy was a father of 3. Divorced in 1997, He maintained a close relationship with his family, often through social media, where they tagged each other in photos and videos. Sharing a lot of information online, his family was well aware of his plans and activities. On November 10, 2011, Timothy posted on Facebook, announcing his decision to leave the past behind and start working on a farm near Cambridge, Ohio. He said goodbye to his ex-wife and children and packed his belongings. On the morning of November 13th, he sent a final message to one of his children. Aware that the police were on his trail, Richard altered his strategy, which effectively kept the authorities at bay. Thus, Timothy's meeting with the duo took place at an abandoned shopping center. Once there, Richard followed his usual routine. When his victim was distracted, he pulled the trigger. Brogan then dug a grave and buried Timothy on the spot. Meanwhile, the FBI's efforts to trace the ad's IP address led them to a house in Akron. The owner, named Joe, mentioned that he had rented a room to a man named Ralph, whom he described as friendly but always on his computer. This detail strongly suggested the suspect's profile. Joe provided the police with the man's phone number without any resistance. Another team of investigators retrieved surveillance footage from the restaurant where Scott had met Richard. They discovered that the man they were looking for was, in fact, Richard. To make matters worse, he was not alone, but accompanied by a young man, Brogan. The combination of the surveillance images and the phone number provided by Joe, tracked through the GPS system, allowed them to locate the main suspect. Amazingly, he was just a few blocks away. As Richard walked down the street, agents surrounded him. Without any dramatic chases or extensive operations, he was apprehended. A subsequent search of the two residences he had used revealed additional information, including documents and photos. It was finally confirmed that the second body was Ralph's. Not long after, agents arrested Brogan at his home. Thanks to his statements, the police were able to locate Timothy's body. Richard faced 25 charges, including aggravated murder, robbery, kidnapping, and identity theft. Brogan was assigned a lawyer, and a plea deal was discussed on the condition that he cooperated with the investigation. However, he refused, considering it a betrayal of Richard, and resisted any deals offered to him. Thus, his trial began in October 2012. The Ohio jury, composed of 7 women and 5 men, deliberated for 20 hours. Brogan was acquitted of the identity theft charge but found guilty on all other counts. He was convicted of 3 counts of aggravated murder and 1 count of attempted murder. The jury noted that his age made the decision difficult. On November 13, 2012, Brogan was sentenced to life without parole for 70 years. In Richard Beasley's case, once the facts were established regarding the murders of Ralph Geiger, David, and Timothy Kern, the jury found him guilty in March 2013 of 26 counts, including aggravated murder, kidnapping, and aggravated robbery. They unanimously recommended the death penalty. Consequently, in April 2013, during the sentencing hearing, Richard was condemned to death. However, a procedural error in the first trial led to a reevaluation of the facts in 2020, reaffirming the sentence. Currently, while awaiting execution, Richard continues to proclaim his innocence. His daughter, Tanya Beasley, has shared on various programs that guilt plagued her for many years, feeling she might have inadvertently helped her father without knowing about his crimes. Despite this, she has strived to live her life as correctly as possible, and even met with the son of one of the victims to express her solidarity. Naen Lot was born in the late 1980s in Arlo, a town on Ireland's southeastern coast. She was the eldest child of Claire and David Lot. She has 3 younger siblings, Phoebe, Tanith, and Kayla. By the summer of 2012, Naen, 26 years old, had grown into a charismatic woman. She was eagerly planning a trip to Australia, looking forward to a vacation filled with exciting experiences, sports, and new friendships. Naen stood out from her peers with her bright smile and charming personality, which drew people to her. She had a large social circle and could easily connect with anyone. However, beneath her outgoing exterior, Naen was a sensitive and vulnerable person who always tried to see the best in others. She cherished her family, who had loved and supported her throughout her childhood. Naen discovered a passion for photography, capturing life's fleeting moments to preserve the world's beauty. This hobby eventually turned into a career, and she became a successful beautician, helping others enhance their natural beauty. Naen experienced some difficulties in her personal life. She wasn't eager to settle into a serious relationship, preferring to enjoy her independence and spend time with friends. This desire for freedom led her to take a trip to Australia, where she was attracted by the warm climate, stunning beaches, and exotic landscapes, finding everything fresh and romantic. Naen met Daniel Murtaugh in Australia, and it was as if they were polar opposites. While Naen was outgoing and lively, Daniel was quiet and reserved, with piercing eyes and a toned physique that immediately caught her attention. Despite their differences, they felt an instant and inexplicable connection, sharing common interests and a deep sense of intimacy. As they spent more time together, their days were filled with unforgettable experiences and memories. They strolled along stunning beaches, explored the crystal-clear waters, and shared their deepest dreams and secrets. Naen was captivated by Daniel's surfing skills, and he was drawn to her carefree spirit, genuine nature, and infectious laughter. Their connection grew stronger with each passing day, unencumbered by any barriers or reservations. Daniel, a few years Naen's senior, hailed from Naen, a suburb of Dublin, where he worked as a window fitter and lived with his family. Naen viewed it as a casual fling without any serious commitments. Phoebe was the first to discover Daniel. Shortly after, Claire, the mother, learned about the relationship from her child. Claire quickly suspected that this relationship may not be long-lasting. Naen's life changed dramatically when she found out she was pregnant with Daniel's baby. A few months later, Daniel attempted to rekindle their relationship and start a family, but it ultimately didn't work out. In November 2013, Naen gave birth to a baby girl named Kia, but Daniel was noticeably absent during this significant moment. Instead, her sister Phoebe was the one who offered emotional support and remained a constant companion. Phoebe was by Naen's side during childbirth, took the first photo of mother and daughter, and played a vital role in helping Naen navigate the challenges of new motherhood. Naen's pregnancy marked a turning point in her life, as she transitioned into her new role as a mother. Despite the difficulties she faced, Naen found solace in Phoebe's unwavering support and love. Naen's story is a poignant reminder of the complexities of love and relationships. Although her relationship with Daniel was unfulfilling and lacked deep emotional connection, Naen was determined to provide a stable and loving environment for her daughter. Daniel failed to take responsibility for his actions and showed no interest in being a devoted father, leaving Naen to raise Kia on her own. Naen had always tried to provide the best life for her daughter, Kia. In 2016, she wanted to build a home with her loved ones, so she rented a house where everyone could live together as a family. However, her hopes were crushed when Daniel, Kia's father, failed to move in with them. This realization marked the end of Naen's. Daniel's constant absence and broken promises had left her emotionally drained, so she made the decision to end their relationship and start a new chapter in her life. Despite their separation, Naen had held onto the hope that Kia would still be able to maintain a relationship with her father. Claire, Naen's mother, had a more realistic view of Daniel's. His love for boxing was a higher priority for him than his family. In contrast, Naen remained devoted to her daughter, Kia, providing her with the love, care, and support she required. As Kia grew up without her father, she had her mother as a role model, teaching her to persevere through challenges. In October 2019, Claire suggested that Naen celebrate her birthday in Rome. During the trip, Naen's daughter, Kia, also referred to as Naen, confided in her mother about the struggles she was facing in her life. Naen had moved on from her relationship with Daniel and was thriving as a single mother. She enjoyed her job, took pride in her accomplishments, and was happy with her life. Her future looked promising, especially after being offered a modeling job. Her happiness was short-lived when she discovered that Daniel continued to make unfulfilled promises to visit their daughter Kia in Ireland. When Daniel requested a meeting to give Naen money for Kia, she was skeptical, suspecting that he just wanted to see her, not their daughter. She agreed to his request, but only because she didn't want Kia to think poorly of him. Naen still held on to the hope of creating a real family, despite the increasing impossibility of it. To shield Kia from disappointment, and Naen made excuses for her father's absence. She wanted to protect her daughter from Daniel's irresponsibility and neglect. Meanwhile, Daniel was reluctant to let Naen go and was fearful that she might start dating other men. As a result, Naen felt forced to keep her personal life hidden from him to avoid his controlling behavior and threats. In 2019, Naen Lot's life drastically changed after she ended her relationship with her partner, Daniel. She started dating a new partner from Turkey, but her attempts to keep this relationship private were unsuccessful. Daniel discovered Naen's new partner and became furious, sparking a series of stalking incidents that caused her immense distress. On December 5th, Naen sent a clear message to Daniel, stating that their relationship was over and demanding that he stop harassing her. She believed this would finally bring an end to the toxic relationship. However, on December 13th, Naen asked Daniel to watch their child, Kia, while she attended her aunt's birthday celebration at a local pub. Daniel agreed to watch Kia at his home in Kondan, a different location from where Naen lived, which was in Wicklow. On the night of December 14th, Daniel repeatedly tried to contact Naen, calling her at 5:57 and 1:26 a.m., but she didn't answer. He eventually sent her a message asking her to return home soon. Naen returned home and changed her clothes, but the events that followed are unclear. What is known is that Daniel attacked Naen, terrifying her 6-year-old daughter, Kia. The noise and screams caught the attention of a neighbor, Isla Klinovich, who investigated the source of the commotion. Isla saw Naen lying on the floor in her hallway with Daniel standing over her, his face contorted with rage and panic. Horrified, Isla retreated to her apartment and quickly contacted Naen's family. When Claire, mother of Naen's, heard Isla's story, she felt overwhelmed with fear and anxiety. Daniel fled the scene in his Volvo, leaving behind a trail of dust and blood. When Claire rushed into Naen's apartment, she was met with a disturbing sight. The walls and broken glass were covered in blood splatters, reflecting the horrific events that had unfolded. But the situation was far from over. It was now 9:50 a.m. Claire, Phoebe, and Kyle walked into the kitchen and were shocked by what they saw. Naen's body was lying on the floor, brutally mutilated and showing no signs of life. Meanwhile, about 20 miles away in the town of Lahr, Daniel lost control of his car and crashed into a ditch. Miraculously, he escaped with only minor scratches. John Beck Ken stumbled upon the wreckage and was shocked by the scene. A car with broken headlights, shattered glass, and a lone vehicle lying in a ditch. His initial thought was that the driver had been drinking after a Christmas party, but as he approached the car, he was surprised to find it empty. Suddenly, Daniel emerged from the fog, his eyes vacant, his body shaking, and his clothes covered in blood. Daniel confessed to the crime in a despairing tone to a witness. He was then taken to the hospital in an ambulance, repeatedly muttering that he loved Naen, as if seeking forgiveness. Meanwhile, Naen's apartment was in disarray. When paramedics and police officers arrived, they were met with a strong smell of blood. The walls and furniture were smeared with it, and the scene was chaotic. Paramedic Ian Clark was struck by the extent of the destruction. Broken dishes, shattered glass, and bloody footprints indicated that a violent crime had occurred. Phoebe and Kyle rushed Naen to urgent care after a severe accident, where medical professionals were able to save her life despite her critical injuries, which had left her unconscious. Naen was rushed to St. Vincent's Hospital, where she was admitted to the intensive care unit. Doctors documented severe injuries to her head, neck, and chest at 10:58 a.m. Her condition was critical, with 64 injuries found on her body, the cause of which was unclear. Naen received multiple blood transfusions, but her condition remained critical. Claire hoped that Naen would recover. Claire stayed by her daughter Naen's side in the hospital, bringing comfort with familiar items from home like family photos, Naen's favorite perfumes, and cherished toys. Despite the doctor's bleak outlook, Claire was resolute in her support, believing that her love and care would help Naen navigate the challenging road to recovery. Meanwhile, Daniel was scheduled to appear in court on December 16th. The court decided to hold him in custody until his trial. On the same day, accompanied Naen to a follow-up examination to assess the damage to her brain. Claire prayed that Naen would find the strength to pull through. Tragically, Naen's injuries were too severe, and she passed away on December 17th, between 3 o'clock and 4 p.m., without ever regaining consciousness. Irish Police Colonel Dean McCarthy described the violent crime as one of the most brutal he had ever witnessed. After the murder, Chief State Pathologist Dr. Linda Leau performed the autopsy at the city funeral home on December 18th. Following the autopsy, the victim's loved ones, particularly her family, were left with many unanswered questions. Cleo was consumed by her thoughts, trying to make sense of the events that had transpired. The next day, the killer, Daniel, confessed to the heinous crime, describing how he attacked and brutally murdered Naen. According to Daniel's account, he started by grabbing Naen, hitting her on the head, and then repeatedly punching her with his fists. Despite her efforts to resist, Daniel continued the assault, kicking her and eventually stabbing and strangling her with a charger cord. Kia, a witness to the horrific attack, pleaded with her father to stop the assault, but her cries were ignored. Despite Naen's desperate attempts to fight back, Daniel had remarkable physical strength and was impossible to defeat. A funeral service for Naen was held on December 22nd at St. Mary and Peter's Church in Arlo, her hometown. The ceremony drew over 1,000 mourners, and hundreds more watched the live broadcast as they gathered to bid their final farewells. 6 people carefully carried the coffin containing Naen, a young and beautiful girl, as if she were asleep in eternal rest. The altar was surrounded by scarlet velvet roses. Naen's mother, Claire, sat in the front row, struggling to hold back tears as she gazed at her daughter's coffin. Her eyes shone with love and admiration for she who lay before her. Family and friends gathered nearby, overcome with grief, as they clutched handkerchiefs to their faces and openly wept. David Lot, Naen's father, stepped forward, his voice shaking with sorrow, and tearfully placed one of Naen's elegant handbags beside the coffin. Naen had a remarkable ability to turn anything into a stunning fashion accessory that perfectly matched her one-of-a-kind style. Next, Kyle, a close family friend, approached the altar, holding a photograph of Naen and Kia beaming with happiness as they hugged each other. Kia, confused and grief-stricken, clung to her mother's side, unable to comprehend the loss she had suffered. Phoebe, Naen's sister, brought a pair of shoes to the altar, the very ones Naen had been planning to wear to her prom. Overwhelmed with emotion, Phoebe struggled to hold back her tears. Tanith, another close friend, carefully placed a photo album on the altar, filled with cherished memories of Naen's carefree days, joyful parties, and radiant smiles. These memories would remain with them forever, a poignant reminder of the happy times they had shared with Naen. With genuine empathy on his face, Priest Michael Moore led the ceremony with heartfelt words of eternal life and hope that soothed the grieving family and friends. Looking directly at Kia, he voiced gratitude for the immense joy she had brought Naen during her life, wishing that Kia's own life ahead be one rich with care, protection, and enduring love. He reassured Kia that her mother's loved ones would always be there to protect her from harm, serving as her guardian angels. Naen's sisters, Phoebe and Tanith, tearfully bid their final farewell, overcome with grief at the loss of their beloved sister. The ceremony concluded with the playing of funeral music, after which Naen's coffin was laid to rest in the San Gabriel Cemetery. As her loved ones said their final goodbyes, they took comfort in knowing that Naen's soul was at peace. Abby Hernandez, who most people simply called Abby, came into the world on October 12, 1998, in Manchester, New Hampshire. Her parents, Zena and Ruben Hernandez, were thrilled to welcome her. Growing up, Abby was known for her bright personality. She was cheerful, full of energy, and got along with just about everyone. She liked to call herself a tomboy, and she totally embraced that label. Abby had a deep love for sports and a big soft spot for classic rock. Her outfits, her attitude, it all reflected that cool, laid-back style. At the time of the incident, Abby was dating a boy named Jimmy Campbell. The two were inseparable, and everyone around them could see how much Jimmy adored her. Their relationship was the kind people envied, genuine and full of affection. Life hadn't always been easy, though. When Abby was still young, her parents divorced. After that, Zinnia raised Abby and her sister Sarah on her own. Even with this big shift in their family dynamic, Abby kept her positive outlook. She didn't dwell on things she couldn't change and was known for staying optimistic no matter what came her way. But everything would take a tragic turn on what started as just another ordinary day in October 2013. October 9th, 2013 began like any other school day for Abby. She was just a few days away from celebrating her 15th birthday, something she'd been looking forward to for weeks. That morning, she chose to wear a gray sweatshirt, black yoga pants, and a brand new pair of black-heeled boots, her birthday present from her mom, which she was wearing for the first time. Anyone who's ever worn new shoes knows that first-day pain, and Abby was feeling it hard. Her best friend, Miranda, noticed how she limped around school, clearly uncomfortable. Still, she made it through the day, smiling, chatting with friends, and even snapping some pictures. But that afternoon, something went terribly wrong. Zinnia expected her daughter to walk through the door after school like usual, but Abby never came home. Normally, she took the bus, but she sometimes enjoyed walking back if the weather was nice and the mood struck her. Since the walk was short, Zinnia figured maybe this was one of those days. Of course, she had no idea how painful those new boots had made Abby's walk that day. As time passed and the sky darkened, Zinnia's concern grew. She called Abby's phone, but there was no answer. Panic quickly set in. Zinnia drove to the school and spoke to the librarian, desperately asking if anyone had seen her daughter. The answer left her frozen. Abby had left school on foot hours earlier. At 7 p.m. that night, Zinnia reported her 14-year-old daughter missing. The police jumped into action right away. Conway was a small community, and news of Abby's disappearance spread quickly. Investigators reviewed security footage from the school and spotted Abby leaving the building at exactly 2:29 p.m., walking toward home just like she usually would. She had her backpack on and was still wearing the same clothes. Nothing appeared out of the ordinary. There was no sign that she had run away. Her room was untouched and none of her belongings were missing. Still, the investigators needed to ask all the standard questions. Had Abby been acting strange? Was she upset about something? Could she have been planning to leave? Everyone who knew her, friends, teachers, family, dismissed those ideas right away. Abby was excited about her upcoming birthday and had been busy planning the party down to the smallest detail. Her friends insisted she'd never just vanish like that. With no time to waste, police began canvassing the town, sharing Abby's photo with the public and organizing search efforts. Volunteers joined in, hoping to bring her home safe. The search for Abby had begun. Volunteers from all around came together in hopes of finding Abby. They searched tirelessly on foot and from the air. Even the FBI joined the case early on, bringing more eyes, expertise, and urgency. Despite all the effort, though, no trace of Abby was found. Within just a few days, the police were flooded with hundreds of tips. Investigators went through them one by one, chasing every possible lead. They also held frequent press conferences, keeping the public updated and trying to maintain hope. But as days passed without any progress, unease grew in the community. A dedicated website called Bring Abby Home was created, filled with photos and videos of Abby, keeping her story alive and urging people to help bring her back. Then came October 12th, Abby's 15th birthday. Instead of blowing out candles or unwrapping presents, her family held a candlelight vigil. Neighbors and friends gathered together, sang happy birthday, and prayed for Abby's safe return. It was a heartbreaking moment. Zinnia, her mother, was trying to stay strong, not just for Abby, but also for her other daughter, Sarah. But the weight of the unknown was crushing. Some days, hope felt impossible. Meanwhile, detectives kept at it. They pulled Abby's phone records and saw that her last location pinged about a mile from home. After that, the phone went completely dark. Text messages didn't reveal anything suspicious either. The last person Abby had messaged was her boyfriend, Jimmy, who had been taking the bus home around the same time. He was questioned, of course, but it quickly became clear. Jimmy had nothing to do with her disappearance. Their relationship had been genuine and loving. Weeks passed. On November 6, 2013, almost a month after Abby vanished, Zinnia was sorting through her mail when one envelope caught her attention. It was postmarked October 23rd, exactly 2 weeks after Abby went missing. Something about it felt significant. When Zinnia opened the letter and began to read, her heart stopped. It was from Abby. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, though the tone and wording felt off. The letter said she was safe, that she loved her family, and that she had run away. She urged her mom not to lose hope. Zinnia read the letter over and over, but something didn't sit right. It was Abby's writing, yes, but not her voice. Zinnia handed the letter over to authorities immediately. While it shocked everyone, investigators weren't convinced by its contents. To them, the message felt forced, too polished, like someone had told Abby exactly what to write. DNA testing confirmed that the letter was indeed written by Abby, but detectives believe she hadn't written it freely. They didn't buy the runaway story for a second, and thankfully they didn't stop investigating. Months went by with no sign of Abby. Then, on March 17, 2014, something unexpected happened. Roughly 30 miles from Conway, a woman was involved in a car accident. But instead of a typical exchange, the other driver pulled out a weapon and brutally attacked her. It was a terrifying encounter. The attacker was quickly arrested. At first, the incident seemed random, but investigators had a gut feeling this man might somehow be connected to Abby's case. They weren't ready to share why publicly, but something about him raised red flags. That man was 34-year-old Nathaniel Nate Kibbe. He was an odd and intense person, deeply into guns, the Constitution, and extremist political ideas. Investigators confiscated dozens of firearms from his home. He didn't put up a fight, but during the search of his remote property, police spotted a large shipping container tucked behind his house. It stood out immediately. When asked about it, Nate became defensive, insisting that the warrant only allowed them to seize his weapons, not to look elsewhere. Legally, the officers had to comply. So, after collecting the firearms, they left, completely unaware that behind that container door was Abby Hernandez. Yes, Nate was Abby's kidnapper, but how did he manage to abduct her in the first place? Let's go back to the day Abby disappeared. She had just missed her school bus by seconds. Her feet were sore from those new boots, but with no other choice, she began the short walk home. As she was texting Jimmy, a car pulled up beside her. A man in his 30s noticed her limping and offered her a ride. Tired and grateful, Abby accepted. She had no idea that choice would lead to months of terror. Rather than taking her home, the driver turned into an empty parking lot. That's when the mood shifted. Abby tried to get out, but the man pulled a weapon on her, tied her hands, blindfolded her, and forced her to crouch down in the passenger side footwell, completely hidden from view. After a long and disorienting drive, the car finally stopped. Abby was dragged out and thrown onto something soft. When the blindfold came off, she realized she was on a filthy mattress, and she was trapped. She was inside Nate's shipping container. The room where Abby was being held was small, the floor made of cold metal. The door had latches on it, and the walls were padded to keep any sound from escaping. It was a prison disguised as a storage unit. When Abby looked up, she saw her captor again. This time, he was wearing a gold Halloween mask. Nate made it clear from the start. If she tried to scream or escape, there would be serious consequences. It's impossible to put into words what Abby must have felt in that moment. Fear doesn't even begin to describe it. Almost immediately, the nightmare began. Nate, who was both cruel and twisted, started a pattern of abuse and control. Even though she was already locked away in the shipping container, he kept her tied up for days at a time. He used devices like stun guns and shock collars to hurt her, for no reason other than his own sick satisfaction, and tragically was also repeatedly assaulted. Despite everything she was enduring, Abby refused to give up. Deep down, she clung to a powerful desire to survive and to one day return home. In the early weeks of her captivity, while Abby's family and police were appearing on the news, holding out hope, Nate would use those moments to taunt her. He'd tell her how close her family was, how hard they were looking for her, then twist the knife by reminding her that she was still stuck, still unseen. It was psychological torture meant to break her spirit. But strangely, seeing her mom crying on TV didn't defeat Abby. It fueled her. It gave her a reason to keep going, a reason to fight. 2 weeks after she was taken, Nate forced Abby to write a letter to her mother, the same one Zinnia received in early November. Nate believed the letter would throw off the police, and though Abby did what he asked, she secretly scratched the words help and kidnap into the paper with her fingernails. But Nate noticed. He made her do it all over again and sent out the cleaner version. Still, the abuse continued. Months passed. At around the 6-month mark, had a realization. She had some power in this horrible situation. She noticed that if she talked to Nate like a friend, acted calm and cooperative, he let his guard down. So she started to engage him in small conversations. Over time, Nate developed a strange emotional connection to her, one that Abby quietly used to her advantage. Nate began referring to her as the closest thing he had to a daughter. He'd sit and talk for hours about his life, his conspiracy theories, his obsession with the Constitution. He even let her read books and eventually removed her blindfold, allowing her to see his face for the first time. It was then, through one of those books, a cookbook with the name Nate written inside, that Abby finally learned her abductor's real name. That was a turning point. Abby discovered more about Nate. He admired the Gadsden flag and had strong libertarian beliefs. He filled their conversations with political rants, as if he were teaching a class. She listened, quietly learning everything she could. She also learned about another part of Nate's life. He printed counterfeit money. He saw it as his way of getting back at a government he loathed. In an attempt to earn more trust, Abby even helped him with the fake bills. She figured the more useful and non-threatening she seemed, the better chance she had of surviving. Eventually, the constant abuse started to lessen, though it didn't stop completely. Around this time, Nate began hiring sex workers and paying them with counterfeit money. He wasn't just exploiting them, he was scamming them too. One of those women was 27-year-old Lauren Monday. The day after meeting Nate, she tried to use the money he'd given her and realized it was fake. Furious, she called him, threatening to go to the police. Nate hadn't given Lauren his real name, but he slipped up. His email address included his full name. On top of that, Lauren was able to give investigators a clear description of his car. This was a major break. Shortly after Lauren's call, Nate burst into the container in a panic. He was angry and unsettled, but Abby knew better than to react. She stayed calm, asked him what was wrong, and listened. She'd gotten used to his rants by now, and she knew it was safer to stay quiet and let him talk. Then something unexpected happened. Nate walked over to Abby and handed her a plastic bag containing her clothes. "I need to get you out of here," he said. Abby didn't know what that meant. Was he moving her to another location? Killing her? Letting her go? She had no idea. Her heart was racing. He put her in the car and started driving. They drove for what felt like forever, and Abby tried to read the signs. Though she had learned to anticipate Nate's moods, this was different. He seemed more erratic than usual. Then she looked out the window. Recognition hit her like a wave. Nate was driving her back to the exact spot where he'd taken her. The same place where it all started. Without another word, he pulled over, told her to get out, and then he drove off. Abby slammed the car door shut and watched as Nate drove off, disappearing down the road. She stood there, frozen in disbelief. Part of her wanted to celebrate, scream, cry, anything to release the rush of emotions surging through her. But fear lingered. What if he changed his mind? What if he came back, still wearing the same clothes from the day she vanished 9 months earlier? Abby began the walk home. Each step was filled with uncertainty. Felt surreal, like she was dreaming, but she kept going until finally, she reached her front door. Inside, Xenia was in the living room, overwhelmed by the same sorrow that had haunted her for months. Then, Abby's voice, a soft call from the entryway. Xenia froze, thinking her mind was playing tricks on her. But when she turned around and saw her daughter standing there, alive, everything stopped. She was transported back to that awful October night when her world fell apart. And now, suddenly, the one thing she prayed for had come true. The emotions between them were indescribable. Xenia had lived every single day hoping, begging for this moment. And now, here Abby was, standing in front of her, safe, breathing. But the nightmare wasn't over. Though Abby had escaped, Nate was still out there. And opening up about what had happened was incredibly difficult for her. Just before letting her go, Nate had made one final threat. If she ever talked to the police, he would find her and her family, and it wouldn't end well. That threat was enough to silence Abby. Her instinct was to protect the people she loved, even if that meant keeping quiet about her abduction. Because of her silence, rumors spread quickly. People began questioning her story. Some accused her of lying, claiming she ran away and made the whole kidnapping up. The same community that had supported her family for months now turned their backs on them, casting doubt and judgment. It was heartbreaking, but with support from law enforcement and those who still believed in her, Abby eventually found the strength to speak the truth. She told them everything about the container, the mask, the torture, and revealed the identity of the man who had taken her, Nathaniel Kibbe. In 2014, Nate was arrested. Building the case took nearly 3 years. The charges against him were staggering, around 205 in total. They ranged from kidnapping to sexual assault to producing counterfeit currency. When the trial finally came, the verdict was clear. Guilty. Nate was sentenced to 45 to 90 years in prison. Then came May 16th. In a courtroom full of people, Abby walked in, stronger, braver, and more determined than ever. She faced Nate and delivered a powerful statement. She forgave him. She told him, calmly and clearly, that she forgave everything he had done to her because she wasn't going to carry the weight of his cruelty for the rest of her life. That moment wasn't just about closure. It was about reclaiming her power. Abby explained that her experience changed her. She no longer took the little things for granted. Sunsets, quiet mornings, laughter, freedom. The trauma she endured had reshaped her view of the world, but it hadn't broken her spirit. Today, Abby is living a quiet, peaceful life. She's a hairdresser and a devoted mother. Her days are filled with love, purpose, and healing. What Abby endured is unimaginable, but her story isn't just one of survival. It's a lesson in resilience. When faced with unspeakable horror, she didn't give up. She held on, for herself, for her mother, for her future. Abby Hernandez is a fighter. Her courage in the darkest of moments reminds us all that even when the odds feel impossible, we can still hold on. We can still survive, and we can still rise. Linda Leau was born on April 10, 1950, in California. She married Philip Leau and took his last name. By 1977, the two of them divorced and Linda had a new boyfriend. She stayed with the new boyfriend in Tustin, California. On October 6th, Linda met up with Philip at a restaurant to collect money he owed her for damaging her boyfriend's car. Philip slashed her boyfriend's tires and poured sugar into the gas tank, resulting in $300 worth of damages. Witnesses reported seeing her arguing with a man believed to be Philip Leau at a nearby gas station, and she was never seen again. Linda's boyfriend called police to report her missing when she did not arrive back home. Investigators considered Philip a suspect, but could not prove that he had any involvement in her disappearance. In 1986, a woman's body was found down an embankment along the Ortega Highway in Lake Eisenhower by highway surveyors. Investigators determined that the victim had been shot in the head, but they could not identify the remains. In August of 2021, investigators exhumed several sets of remains trying to see if one of them matched the woman found in 1986. Linda's remains were identified as a match in January 2022, and it was confirmed that the remains belonged to her. She was just 27 years old when her life was taken. Philip LeBeau passed away in 2008, which makes it even harder to prove that he is responsible, but investigators are still working on the case. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.